Can you hear me? Great, fantastic. I'm Anders. I do ML stuff. I'm the lead MLOps engineer at Charlotte Tilbury Beauty, and I was previously at ASOS. Today I have with me Biswa and Yufei. If you'd like to join me on stage, and maybe we can do a round of introductions for you as well. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hello, I'm Yufei, and I already did like an introduction in the morning. So I'm a data science manager at John Lewis now, looking after all the data science project in johnlewis.com. And don't forget our latest release Christmas ad today. Just launched it.
Hi, my name is Biswa Sengupta. I am the managing director and general manager for AI products and platform for JP Morgan Chase and Company. So I manage product teams, I have ML engineering teams, and the likes, everything that's required to deliver a product end to end.
I guess I should mention what I do as well. I generally build the tech stack for the companies that I'm in. Previously at ASOS, I was responsible for building the offline batch ML tech stack, and at Charlotte Tilbury, I build all of it from scratch at the moment. I think we'll start off with talking about why should you do MLOps? Is it worth it? And what are the big pros? And can you talk about any direct benefits you might have seen from it?
Sure. So I think even before MLOps, you may want to ask what product are you manufacturing that requires machine learning or some sort of quantitative statistical methods embedded in them. So the most important thing to ask is there a product market fit for the product that you are manufacturing? MLOps, on the other hand, is a means to an end and makes your life easier. At the end of the day, today's stakeholder, I can speak as a stakeholder as well as an engineer. So as a stakeholder, we do not have infinite runway for a machine learning team, right? So you'd have 3 months, 6 months to prove a project, and therefore you need to have the ability to iterate over your machine learning models or the product that you are manufacturing soon enough. If it's duct-taped, manual, error-prone, it'll take you long. MLOps allows you, if done properly, to improve your go-to-market by quite a 10x, 5x, depending on the maturity of the MLOps platforms that you have. The other thing is, as a developer, as an engineer, your developer experience improves. You don't have to go and talk to N different teams. Can you give me that? Can you give me X? Can you give me the Y? So being able to standardize a machine learning process end to end helps with the developer experience. And if you put all of this together, it's all about adoption. You're manufacturing a machine learning model for a particular purpose. If it's not adopted, regardless whether you are using a billion parameter transformer model or whether you are using a linear regression, doesn't matter, right? So it's why are you doing what you are doing? So MLOps, I would say, enables you to get to the answer quicker.
I think the similar story here is first of all, you definitely see the satisfactory from the stakeholders. They definitely see the people working in efficiency, and it's it's easier to bring from the conception to production, and they can quickly go testing the benefits, and then they can plan that work properly, and it's the keep on iteration goes on. And also it's for the people actually working as part of the MLOps, the whole process, you definitely feel it kind of define that process well, and also increase the collaboration. It's usually very easy to be companies, very business leads, that are trying to differentiate a role a lot, and it's not very healthy to trying to transfer the knowledge. And then there's an outcome is if someone leaves the company, and if there's not exactly a rule coming up immediately, and you're kind of losing certain part of the knowledge, definitely. And then if we have encourage such ways of working, and you see although some people are not exactly the role, they kind of share some kind of the knowledge, and it's kind of like a better support about the work that we deliver. And also it's like for more people involved, it's like your career path is not actually restricted to a very narrow route. It's like you are opening up like more opportunities for these people. And I feel like possibly for the young people, it's like they are quite happy with this, yeah, adopting this, yeah.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of that. I also think if you're being very cynical about it, you want your employees to be spending their time doing what they're best at. And if you don't have a lot of the MLOps in place for smoothing the journey to production, what your scientists often end up doing is they become engineers, and what your ML engineers end up doing is they become data engineers. And like you need all of that machinery to be very smooth so that they can spend most of their time doing what they're best at. That's where we get a lot of value. So speaking of value, we're data people, so we like to measure things, right? So how do you measure the impact of your MLOps?
I think for us it's easier because it's time to market, right? How many APIs, how many RPC endpoints, et cetera, that you are opening up to the user, and how does it actually translate into your particular product's adoption is the final metric we look at. There are obviously technical metrics because, for example, in a bank, we would move roughly $10 trillion a day. So that's a huge amount of money that we are moving, right? So being able to have millisecond accuracy, if something is sanctioned, we need to know it here and now, not 1 minute later. So there are the other technical metrics that we judge MLOps and what it brings on the table, but the derived metrics become more and more important. The other thing is also if you are training models, and given the size of large corporations, you train hundreds and thousands of these models. Being able to reuse many of these models is absolutely a must because cost of training is going higher and higher with millions of parameter models coming up. You don't want to keep on retraining all the time. So having a methodology to reuse your models, your data becomes extremely important, just to save time, money, energy.
Yeah, and in John Lewis, it's like we are the data team. We love metrics. So very straightforward, definitely some business metric that we can improve or additionally that we can gain. And these are usually, if we can, it's like usually done by A/B testing. So these are very straightforward number that you can output. However, not all the models, they are serving some customer-facing applications. So it's also trying to be more flexible there. It's how many other service you're trying to support. It's kind of the usage of that as well. And it's we're still in some certain kind of the migration period. It's not completely over. So I think the business side, they can also try to track the cost. It's compared with if we are not adopting this on MLOps, and what's it going to look like, presumably a year ago. And then they can kind of work out or estimate for example, some the time saved or some the business cost, especially about the tooling and then the people and some associated operation cost as well. So these are the things that we can help to kind of measure or estimate. And finally, I think it's regularly we are going to have some retro and then talking about something I think more quality spec, and it's more about and also it's sometimes it can feed into some the employee NPS scores. It's there's something for the sentiment as well. It's how do you feel about these? And is ML also as a topic, it's do you think this actually contribute to your work happiness or some of the other things? So yeah, it's a portfolio of the metrics that we're trying to collect.
Yeah, for me, I think the way I think about it is very simplified. I just spoke to one of our product owners, and they are managing a recommender system. And they were sort of taking me through the timeline of the things that they tried to get this recommender system up. And they started with no AI at all, just rules-based. And then trying just product X product, no personalization and all of this. And they got to the end of the timeline and said, there are all these other things that we'd like to try, but I don't quite know whether they'll work. And each one of them, well, that will probably take 6 months to even get the answer of whether or not it's worth doing. And what I'd like to say to that person is, what if it took 2 weeks, right? So the way that I approach like the value of your MLOps is how many experiments can you do in a year? And that's what I said as my OKR. It ideally shouldn't go backwards, but most people starting out are doing very few experiments a year if you're a small operation. And that means that the business isn't getting a whole lot of levers or capabilities to get answers out of the stuff that you're doing. Is it worth pursuing? I think you don't just need to record the metrics, but you also need to sort of like agree that this is what we're aiming for, because otherwise no one will optimize for it. I also think touching on their size of company is quite important. I think we here represent quite a good portion of the spectrum of the sizes in companies. How do you think that the size of the company sort of like factors into how you approach MLOps?
So roughly speaking, I think if I get the number right, we have 40 to 45,000 engineers working on different variety of engineering, ML engineering, software engineering, front-end development, back-end development, you name it, there is one or the other team doing it. The problem of size is you need coordination amongst all these variety of teams that are geologically spread across tens of different countries. So having an management on top of the variety of disparate teams is essential. So what we have noticed is that, let's say there is a team that's working on terraforms, the other one is, let's say we have our own version of Spinnaker, Jenkins, and the likes. If there is a breaking change and some other team, application team, is pushing for their application code, they need to know a priori that the integration tests haven't run the way they should have run, right? So being able to communicate in these large team size is non-trivial often. So you have to automate a lot of the things that a team of 20 project managers aren't able to do that, right? So automation and being able to surface the right information to the end developers is absolutely critical for really large-sized organizations.
In John Lewis, it's actually very funny because you actually have like two sides. One is the business part. It's like the johnlewis.com is fully digital, and you can treat it as like a startup inside a large company. Also, we can call them guinea pigs. So it's like the journey trying to adopting that is relatively easy. Maybe sometimes even easier than a freshly startup, because you do have some support from the big company. And it's like we are allowed to like testing and exploring a little bit, and until like recently we trying to standardize and then trying to comply to the company policy, and then it's like trying to like consolidate the tools as Biswa mentioned. This is a really important step for us. And then it's like as we are achieving something in the MLOps and then trying to roll out to the wider business side. And John Lewis as a partnership is not only John Lewis, it's also holding like another very favorite brand, Waitrose. And it's like you're starting to realize it's how different the different business sides can be. And then it's like the similar problems coming up. It's like the different teams are using different system and different use cases. And then it's like I think the requirements are very different. The consumers, suddenly not only the digital consumers, because it's actually, although it's like not very easy to implementing something online, but considering those like our shop floor workers, like the facing customers every day, they don't even have access to Google Sheets. And then you have to make sure it's like the technology that can support your MLOps actually can be accessible for them. So there are like some more fundamental, like the data infrastructure you need to support. It's like even before MLOps can be implemented. And these things can be like some of the things that's interesting. But I think luckily we're still like quite based in UK, so we don't possibly need to worry about like different like regulatory things. So the only thing that we care about is EU, although I think EU is possibly most restrict anyway. So yeah, that's kind of the funny thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in addition to size, what we're also touching on here is maturity. So you can be big, but you might be very early on in your ML journey. And I think that affects quite a lot the kind of choices you make and how you prioritize what you implement and in which order. So as an example, where I've just landed, I am the only ML engineer. And you could say, well, I know what good looks like. I know what the perfect architecture diagram looks like, but it's just you. And if you start building all of that, you will spend 6 months to a year, and that will land, and you'll be providing no value in the meantime, and you don't even know if it's fit for purpose. So often what you need to do is pick the things that make the most impact right now and implement them with actual models that are running right now. And I think that sort of features into a lot of the also misconceptions about our space, which is a lot of people go, well, how do I do MLOps, particularly if you're outside of the MLOps space? And you see blog posts and you see a lot of very fancy diagrams, and you have no idea which end of that diagram you should start at. So in terms of misconceptions about MLOps, what are your thoughts on that?
There are many, right? So the most interesting one is often people who do not have the technical background, are not quite at the coal face, think that it's MLOps or even ML engineering in general is go and buy Microsoft Word and install it, it'll solve your problem, right? So it's not like that, as we all know in this room, that you have disparate solution for the whole tooling end to end. So I think that misconception that go and buy XYZ, install it, deploy it for your 300,000, 500,000 people in the organization solves a problem. No, it doesn't, right? So that's one misconception that I have seen time and time again. If you flip it the other way around, is there is too much of tooling, right? So for data wrangling, there might be 20 different solutions. There are, if you want to do serving, depending, or you want to do REST, you want to do RPC, you want to do GraphQL with RPC, you can have lots of different sorts of serving patterns, etc. And there are, again, lots of different companies that are providing services. There are, depending on the maturity of a company, either you will be building it or you will be buying it. So the other misconception, I would say, there is one size fits all. It doesn't, right? So what might be useful for a team of 5 may not be useful for a team of 50. Even when you have a team of 50, if you are just deploying a recommendation API or a document classification API, just that's a different tooling altogether. If you have a meta platform that's, take AWS, Azure, or a derived versions like what we use, then there are different machine learning models that are coming in. Something uses as NLP, the other is your vanilla logistic regression. So you have different models, and many of them require different maneuvers in the MLOps tooling. So being able to do that is also, I think, misconception that a lot of non-technical folks have. Yeah.
Yeah, and for us, it's like the similar thing. It's like you have to try to convince people MLOps is not just a tool, because a lot of people might be approaching by some third-party suppliers, selling you some like the fancy tools that can claim to save everything for you. And then you need to realize it's not just a tool. And then they're going to fall into another thing. It's like okay, then we are going to hire the people, hire the data scientist, hire the machine learning engineer, and then put them into different groups. And then it's like, this is going to work. And then we do have to like convince them for a while last year. It's like it's not only about tool and people. It's actually a ways of working. It's a culture shifting thing. And it's like you have to I think it's like transform from a company just thinking about buy, but it's not like completely over to like from building something from scratch, but thinking about how you adapt to some tools, and then it's like the people or it's like how we actually working on the problems are more important than just a tool, because people can adapt to the tool, and they can, and it's like a tool can only like the meet your current demands, and then we definitely need to review. It's like after maybe a couple of years, where are we, and do we need to switch like to a relatively like a new tool, or do we need to change our ways of working accordingly to, and then it's like how where are we in the maturity curve, and do we need to like the how we are dealing with the size of the team, and do we need other kind of the support. So I think this is, I think, the most interesting thing, and sometimes we're quite jealous about other like data scientists in the tech company, because they do have like really good platforming or the engineering supporting them, but then it's like we have to find like whatever it is available, and hiring like a machine learning engineer is like the kind of a really difficult thing for John Lewis sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, I think also we're touching a little bit on like third parties there, right? Which is either you're new or you're coming from outside, or MLOps as a sphere is difficult to grok in its entirety sometimes. And sometimes you go, well, let's try and have someone else figure that out for us. How do you go about making that choice, and how do you evaluate those third parties? I know it's very common for scientists or engineers to frustratingly find out that someone higher up than you has been convinced by a buzzword-wielding somebody to buy something, and then now that's your job to maintain. My sort of philosophy there is that you don't go and buy an MLOps anything without both a scientist and an engineer in the room, because you need to be able to call people on their shit, pardon my French. How do you approach that build, buy, rent scenario?
I think it's a tricky one, because the cottage industry out there for each pocket, starting from data wrangling, governance, data management, all the way to serving a model, versioning it, is huge, and it's ever increasing, right? So being able to do a due diligence there is difficult. Often, we do not dive on the first thing that we see in the market. We let it percolate for some time, because we are approached by so many startups saying that, oh, we can solve the problem that ABC hasn't been able to solve it. But when you actually do the due diligence there with the engineer, with the scientists, then I would say, I wouldn't want to give you a number, but half of them don't survive the due diligence process. The other thing is, in financial services, we are heavily regulated. So we are not quite, let's pick this one just because they have written 20 blogs on how to do model observability and monitoring. It doesn't happen like that, right? So we have to tick a lot of compliance and regulation boxes to make, or to even onboard a new capability. Then we have to go and look into things that, do we already have 80% of the stuff that we are onboarding already in-house? If so, is it commercially viable to build that remaining 20% or get a net new vendor? Because it becomes highly intractable when you are dealing with 20, 30, 50 different suppliers, because at the end of the day, the whole point of MLOps is the reducing the impedance mismatch from the start to the end. Now, if you have too many moving parts, it's difficult to control there, right? So we make those sort of, how shall I say, analysis. How easy is it to onboard? And does it tick the regulatory boxes, et cetera, before we even sign a contract or something.
Yeah, and our experience here is definitely bring the professional into the room before you starting to make the decision. And what we have is we have like certain kind of the workshop, and it is strongly, I think it's required by the data science team members. It's like we have to get a spacing there, and then talking about like our use cases, the model that we think we should implement it as soon as possible, and then talking about some potentials that is like which is like possible in the near future, and then trying to pick the tool that's best meeting those requirements. But then we also need to have like a really realistic problem is about for such a size of the organization, we have a huge like legacy system problem that we need to migrate first. And some of the migration possibly already started. And then you have to actually trying to see like actually it's like find the pixel piece is trying to fit in the gap. And then it's like, although sometimes the third party claim they can customize something for you, but there are definitely like a really small piece that possibly is missing that will actually end up into like make your, I think the tech stack like more complicated in the future. So you have to make sure it's like it complies with the current system or at least the system that you are, is going to be like coupling with the MLOps. And also it's like trying to thinking about the people actually using that. Are they comfortable using that? And then how things actually can help them to deliver their work. And do they actually have a way to like influence or adapt to those things with some flexibility? Because if it is something like quite wrapped up, it's like selling to the business side, it means like there are too many like the black box, and possibly engineers don't quite like to dealing with those black box, and it's not also not good for you in the long term. Yeah, so I think it's like finally we consider like quite a lot of like the factors, and I think one of the team members actually like make a sheet and then trying to score them accordingly, and then finally working out the score and then make the recommendations. And also it's like also keeping like sorry, another possibility that we can having something possibly testing in parallel, although we're implementing something, because we realize the use cases for the wider business is so different. So it means we are still flexible, trying to switch to the best one if we feel one day, okay, we are over this stage and then we need to open to something more. So yeah, that's a story.
I liked the idea of being POC driven. I also think with third parties in particular, it's important to remember that our industry isn't static. It moves incredibly fast because it's a burgeoning field. Most of the time, every 6 months, everything changes. So when a third party comes to you and says, hey, we beat Google by 10%, Vertex AI by 10% on something, first you should ask them which model architecture, which data set, because that doesn't mean a whole lot, but also how are you going to make sure that 6 months from now or a year from now, your platform is still competitive, and you should hold them to that. I think we talked a lot about existing challenges and difficulties that we've been through. How about going forwards? What do you think are the really big things that are going to be enormous challenges for the MLOps space in the future?
So I think the first thing that I see more from an infrastructure point is to come up with a standard that you can lift and shift to industrialize the MLOps tooling would be very important, because without that, again, it'll be fractured across the entire, from the start to the end of the journey. I think that's startups, new companies should look into it. Then there is the whole idea of, again, from a regulated industry point of view, is there are many things which machine learning models may not be able to see to manufacture the prediction. So the whole idea of looking into differentially private machine learning models becomes very important. There are guarantees that we have to give to the regulator, for example, that our models are explainable, they could, they have to be interpretable, et cetera, et cetera. But if I wear my academic hat, the amount of work that has been done there in terms of, let's say, interpretable ML or removing bias, et cetera, is still in its infancy, right? So it'll easily take us another 5-10 years before we see concrete go-to methods, algorithms to address these challenges. And this is much beyond regulated industry, right? So this is, I think there was an example early on that looking into computer vision, right? Computer vision for face recognition, etc. How do you even build a vision transformer or what have you? if you don't look into the face of the person and the task that you are doing is face detection, right? It's just counterintuitive. How do you do that? So being able to work on these methodologies is going to be super crucial going forward.
And for me, I think the biggest impact, first of all, is trying to break the bias that machine is going to make decision for you, or it's like the people are going to replaced by machine, because this is kind of the very common, like the misconception that we have to deal with our business people. And it's like we do have some really successful story that we actually showed like them how we actually trying to implement the model for them. And then they're starting to realize, oh, it's actually not taking the job away from me. It's just like making my job better. And then it's like they are not completely isolated from the process. It's like that everyday work is actually becoming the data that can feed into the model. So they do have I think, influence into like how the future looks like. And then once they realize that, and then they just feel like they're more open to the whole tech thing, and they just don't feel like they're like so far away from their daily life. And then they'll be, I think it's like more responsible for everyday work. It's like, for example, like the shop floor or people working with very basic like the data governance work. They're more responsible for their work now. And I think the people working with becomes the pioneer in enrollment into any like the data education program. And that's something that I feel like it can be a good impact for the business and possibly can change the ways of working and trying to bring the data more into the business. And another thing is, as a company like the John Lewis, such great brand, they care a lot about their reputations. So it's like our business stakeholders might be fair, like if things goes too fast, what happens if this goes wild? Like how to deal with the model bias, the fairness, because we definitely have more female customers than male customers. So it's like not going to make certain people feel really bad about like they are deserted by the machine or the technology. So I think it's like as Biswa said, it's at the very early stage. And we are trying to comply with all the regulatory, the latest the GDPR, and then trying to protect that. And then to make sure it's like I think just from the beginning to the model, it's like how can we make this into consideration in the MLOps, and then make it into a better technology rather than something like evil.
Yeah, I think we need to go into questions now. I'll very briefly just say that I think we need to work a lot on making the giant models that only like 4 or 5 companies in the world can actually afford to run smaller. Don't do the brute force approach, do the smart approach, but we won't have time to go into that.